Thanks for being here to our 27th annual Spencer Fox Eccles Convocation. It's my pleasure to introduce to you President David Pershing of the University of Utah.
Thank you, Taylor, and good morning to all of you. It's great to have you here in the David Eccles School of Business for our 27th, can you believe that, 27th annual Spencer Fox Eccles Convocation. I want to begin by extending a special welcome, of course, to the members of the Eccles family. We're so glad you're all here. To the trustees of the Emma Eccles Jones Foundation, and to our students, welcome, faculty, staff, members of the community, and special guests. We are very fortunate to have David Rubenstein here today to talk to us as our convocation speaker. He is a global investment leader, and I think his address is very timely given things that are going on in the nation and the world. And David, we're looking forward to hearing from you. Students, I know you've already had a chance to meet with him as I have, and I guarantee it's going to be an interesting session. Each year, we gather on this occasion to honor Spence Eccles for his vital role, the role he played in working with his aunt, Emma Eccles Jones, to establish the $15 million endowment that has benefited this business school since 1991. This generous gift and the naming of the school pay tribute to Mrs. Jones's father and to Spence's grandfather, David Eccles. We are honored to have the David Eccles School of Business bear his name because he was a great entrepreneur. He lived the classic American rags to riches story. His innovation and hard work led to economic growth, not only here in the state of Utah, but across the Northwest at the turn of the 20th century. This year holds special meaning for the school because, excuse me, as you noticed, you're celebrating 100 years. It's fantastic. And we really appreciate all of the good things that are going on here in the David Eccles School. It also is special for me because this will be my last session as president with you, and I've certainly enjoyed every one of them. The Emma Eccles Jones Endowment was established in 1991, and it's been critical to the giving and providing of scholarships and helping with faculty recruitment, helping with faculty retention, developing innovative programs. I've actually been at the university for 40 years, so I have had the pleasure of seeing the growth of this college. And now, thanks to the endowment, the school, we are so pleased that we've been able to attract top faculty and retain them. I want to thank the trustees of the Emma Eccles Jones Foundation for their great support, Clark Giles, Spence himself, Robert Hatch, for your involvement and your help with the school. And finally, Spence, I want to thank you personally for everything you have done, you and your family, everything you have done for the university, for the David Eccles School, and also for the city and the state. We are so blessed to have you helping us in our region. And now, it's my pleasure to turn the time over to Taylor. Taylor?
We're certainly glad to have Mr. David Rubenstein here with us today and appreciate having him and spending so much time with us and to provide insights. I'm going to take just a moment to introduce Spencer Fox Eccles, but more on a little bit of a personal basis. Spence has done a lot for this school. As President Pershing mentioned, in 1991, he helped name this school after his grandfather. He's participated on many, many, many advisory boards. And in honor of his great work, we had the governor issue a proclamation today in honor of the David Eccles School of Business. And so I'm pleased to announce that today is David Eccles School of Business Day in the state of Utah. And if I So let me quickly read this. Whereas David Eccles was a titan of industry, a successful businessman, investor, family man, mayor, and Utah's first multimillionaire. Whereas throughout his 63 years of life, David Eccles founded 54 businesses throughout Utah, Idaho, Wyoming, and Oregon, traveling more than 44,000 miles to achieve this feat. Whereas he raised talented and entrepreneurial children and grandchildren, in whom he instilled the values of accomplishment, tenacity, and foresight, whereas David Eccles' last surviving child, M. Eccles Jones, gifted the University of Utah's College of Business a generous financial donation in honor of her father's memory. Whereas in recognition of the monumental achievements of David Eccles, the school took his name and worked to preserve his legacy through teaching the values he embodied and instilled in his very children. Whereas the David Eccles School of Business offers 9 undergraduate programs, 4 MBA programs, 7 specialized master's programs, awards $7 million in scholarships annually, houses 11 institutes, centers, and initiatives, and demonstrates a consistent dedication to innovation. Whereas we celebrate the legacy of David Eccles as well as the 100th anniversary of the University of Utah's David Eccles School of Business. After all that, now therefore I, Gary R. Herbert, Governor of the great state of Utah, do hereby declare December 6th, 2017 as David Eccles School of Business Day. Spence, would you come up and receive this plaque and introduce our speaker today?
I'm going to move this over, okay? Thank you all. What a privilege. What a great day. It's nice to be here with you folks and to thank President Pershing and Dean Randall for their gracious comments. I'm thrilled to participate in this, the 27th Annual Spencer Fox Eccles Convocation, particularly as we mark the 100th anniversary of the David Eccles School of Business. What a legacy the school has created, and now to you students here today, remember that you are the ones that will carry on this legacy for the next 100 years. I hope you'll follow the example of the school's namesake, my grandfather David Eccles, through your integrity, your ethical standards, your innovation, and most of all, hard work and dedication to your communities and to your country. In doing so, you'll not only honor his legacy, but also create an important and lasting one for yourselves. And now, our distinguished presenter, David M. Rubenstein. We're honored to have such an individual with us today who truly epitomizes what David Eccles stood for. He's the co-founder and the co-CEO of the Carlyle Group, one of the world's largest private equity firms. Since it was founded 30 years ago, Carlyle has grown into a firm managing $162 billion, yes, that was B as in billion, from 31 offices around the world. Now, while you can read much of this about him and Carlyle in your program, let me just touch on some of the highlights, several that are not mentioned there. He was born and raised in Baltimore, the son of a postal worker and a homemaker. And he went on to become a 1970 magna cum laude graduate of Duke University. From there, was on to get his law degree at University of Chicago and then to practice law in New York for a couple of years before he was tapped as consul to the U.S. Senate Judiciary Committee. It didn't take long for his amazing talents to be noticed, and he was recruited to serve in the Carter administration as Deputy Assistant to the President of Domestic Policy. Then it was back to private sector, and eventually, yes, the founding of the Carlyle Group itself. In addition to his outstanding public service and private business careers, David has served his community and his nation through his generous philanthropy and personal involvement with some of our country's most outstanding organizations. He chairs or serves on the board of directors organizations like the John F. Kennedy Center for Performing Arts, the National Gallery of Art, and the Smithsonian Institute. He's chaired the board of Duke University and currently serves the governing board of both the Harvard University and the University of Chicago. And in recent years, he's made perhaps the biggest impact of all in our nation as a patriotic philanthropist whose generosity seems to know no bounds. Each one of us as Americans owes him our enormous thanks for what he's done. His personal contributions made possible both the restoration of the Washington Monument and the Lincoln Memorial in our nation's capital. And he purchased, yes, for $21.3 million, a rare 1215 version of the Magna Carta, the basis for the rule of law. And then he promptly put it on permanent loan with the Library of Congress, thus sharing it with all of us. He has even endowed habitat for pandas at the Washington National Zoo, and so much more that I could spend the entire hour listing the truly formative gifts he's made that benefit our nation in every way possible. But perhaps the best of all, I'm told that David Rubenstein likes to apply the mother standard as an important measure of his achievements. To quote him, he said, "When I built Carlyle, my mother didn't call to say, 'I'm so proud.' But when I give a gift to some place of importance, she calls and said, 'I'm proud.'" David Rubenstein, I do believe that all of us here today are proud as your mama and truly honored to have you with us. Thank you for all you do, and welcome to the U of U. The podium is yours, sir.
Thank you very much. Come and stand here. So, thank you very much. Thank you all very much, and thank you for that overly generous introduction. I don't think I deserve it, and I'm not sure I deserve to be the convocation speaker, though I'm honored to be so. I want to thank Randy Quarles for inviting me. Randy was a partner of mine at Carlyle for a number of years, did an extraordinary job, and he's now going to go back and serve our country as a member of the Federal Reserve Board. Thank you very much for giving that to our country. And I want to thank the Eccles family because when you think back on the extended Eccles family, they really represent what America should be about and what life really should be about. They've contributed to our country in 4 ways, and these are the ways that I hope that someday I could do the same kind of thing. One is to give to the creation of businesses and wealth and creation of wealth. Secondly, to give back to society through philanthropy. Third, to give back to society through public service. And fourth, to create a very stable and extended family organization, which is really the heartbeat of our society. So thank you very much to the Eccles family and all the Eccles family members who are here today. Thank you for what you've done for our country and for Utah and for all of society. I appreciate it very much. So, let me I have to be honest, what you heard at the beginning isn't quite accurate. It was very nice for you to say that, but the story isn't quite as good as people say, and I like to be accurate. So let me tell you what the reality is. The reality is I was a product of a blue-collar family. My parents did not go to college or graduate from high school. I was their only child. Growing up, I thought I was going to be a professional athlete. It became clear I peaked as an athlete at the age of 7, so that wasn't going to work. Ultimately, I decided that when I was really 10 or 11, I heard a speech by John Kennedy, and he was his inaugural address. And some of you may remember this. It was January 20th, 1961, and he said, "Ask not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country." And it stayed in my mind, and the next day my teacher went over that word for word, line for line, and it was really poetry in prose form. And I realized that I didn't come from money. In those days, there wasn't the opportunity to go out and make large sums of money. If you wanted to go into business in the 50s or 60s, you joined a large corporation, and maybe if you got lucky, you worked your way up over the years. The idea of making money relatively young in life or making enormous sums of money just didn't exist, and I wasn't interested in it. My parents had no money. My father worked in the post office. He never made more than $7,000 a year. So I just aspired to have a nice life, give back to my country. And so that speech inspired me to kind of say I'd become a lawyer. I thought lawyers could serve in government. And so I went to Duke University on a scholarship. It was not a basketball scholarship, I assure you. The only person in Duke's history who got cut from an intramural basketball team when there were only 4 other people on the team. It's hard to do that. I did okay there, and then I went to University of Chicago law school. I had never been I'd never been on an airplane, actually. I graduated from college. I'd never even been on an airplane, never been west of Baltimore, really. And I applied to lots of law schools, and I was fortunate to get in, but the University of Chicago said they would give me a full scholarship I didn't even know much about the law school. I applied at the last minute, and I said, okay, my parents didn't really have much money. So they said, send in the $50, and I will reserve your place in law school. Then they sent me another letter the next day saying, send $50, and we'll reserve your place as a law school dorm. I said, well, wait a second, I don't have a lot of $50 hanging around here, so I'll send the $50 to the dorm, and they will tell the law school I'm coming, because why would I need a law school dorm if I'm not going to go to the law school? I got that from my logic course at Duke. Turns out that logic didn't work. So I get to law school the first day, I show up and say, here I am, David Rubenstein, full scholarship recipient. And they say, well, you didn't send your $50 in, that scholarship went to somebody else. I said, well, why would I have sent the $50 in for the law school dorm if I wasn't coming? They said, that's a different department of the university, we don't talk to them. Oh. So I started crying a little bit and said, my legal career is over, I'm not going to government, I'm not going to do anything. And finally, they didn't want to have anybody crying in the admissions dorm, so they finally said, okay, come on, we'll give you the scholarship. They did, and I've since given them about $35 million in scholarship money to make up for it, so they've been happy. But I got my law degree, and I wanted to go work in government and really serve my country. And what I decided to do is I go to New York and practice law with the man who had written that speech for John Kennedy. His name was Ted Sorensen. And he was the greatest presidential speechwriter in American history. And he was the person who really wrote that wonderful poetic literary kind of words for President Kennedy, and so many great speeches. And I went to work there, and after a couple years, it became clear that I wasn't a good lawyer. Ted Sorensen and others said, well, why don't you think about doing something else? I got the hint. And then my client said, you know, how much longer are you going to do this? So I got the idea that I wasn't a good lawyer. And when you're not good at something, you should move on and do something else. But I said, I don't really want to be a lawyer anyway. Unfortunately, I wasn't a good one, so I knew I couldn't stay. And so they got me a job working for a man who said would be the next president of the United States. And I was going to be his chief counsel. Unfortunately, his name was Birch Bayh. He didn't make it. He was running for president in 1976. 30 days after I joined his operation as chief counsel, he dropped out of his presidential campaign in 76. So I said, uh-oh, I wasn't a good lawyer. My chance of going to the White House has gone away because Birch Bayh dropped out 30 days after I joined his campaign. But then what happened to me may happen to some of you, which is that somebody called me out of the blue, I didn't know, and he offered me something, and I wasn't even sure I should do it, but I decided I had nothing better to do. I said, okay. So I got an interview to work for a man named Jimmy Carter running for president. I didn't know him. I said, isn't he the peanut farmer running for president? He has no chance, I said. Well, they said he might have a chance. So I went to work for him, and when I went to work for him, he was actually, I started in the general election campaign. He was 33 points ahead of Gerald Ford. And when I was finished with my work, he won by 1 point. So people often say, like, what was your contribution? But as we observe, people work on White House staffs, usually work in the campaign, not necessarily picked on merit. So I got a job as the Deputy Domestic Policy Advisor to the President of the United States at the age of 27. Now, I wasn't qualified for that job, but many people in the administration weren't qualified, so I figured I didn't stand out. One of my jobs was to fight inflation. And I got it down to 19%. Nobody's done it better than that since then. Nobody's been able to do 19% since then. So maybe because I got inflation at 19%, you know, we didn't get reelected. Now, I remember this distinctly, that I was the Deputy Domestic Policy Advisor. I was then 31, the end of 4 years. And I realized that Ted Sorensen had been the top advisor to President Kennedy when he was 31. Carter was reelected. I'd be 31, and I'd be the top domestic advisor because my boss was going to do something else. Maybe Jimmy Carter thinks that the rumor that I was going to be promoted kept him from being reelected. I don't know if that was the case, but I do remember I said I really want to run against, I want Carter to run against Ronald Reagan. Why? Because I said he's so old, he's ready for a nursing home. I said, how can anybody 69 years old run for president? Now I'm 68, and now 68 seems like a teenager, but at the time, 69 seemed like he was ready for a nursing home. I didn't think he could do it, but obviously we were wrong. Be careful what you wish for. So what happened the day after we lost the election? Well, in the previous 4 years, people had come to me and said, David, you're a bright young man. If you ever want a job, call me. So the next day after the election, I started calling all these people. None of them called me back. Why? Because you're out of Washington, you're out of power in Washington, you're a dead man. Harry Truman said, if you want a friend in Washington, buy a dog. So nobody would call me back. Nobody wanted me anymore because who wanted to know how the Carter White House worked when Reagan was president? So I had always, had a job after I graduated from law school. I always had something. Well, January 20th comes, I don't have a job. February 20th, March 20th, April 20th. And my mother is saying, well, David, what are you doing? I said, well, I have so many offers that I don't know which one to take. And she believed that for a while, but then when June came and July, she said, David, why don't you just take one of those wonderful offers you have? I said, I just don't want to take any offer. I have to take the best one. Finally, some law firm felt sorry for me, and ultimately they hired me as an associate. I started all over again, and it was clear to my clients pretty quickly that I wasn't that good a lawyer. And they said to me, why don't you think about doing something else? And I thought about that, and then I was clear as well that my partners thought maybe I should do something else. And I realized that if you're not good at something, or you don't like it, you're not good at it, you should do something else. So I read two things that changed my life, and some of you may read things that change your life, and these are the two things that changed my life. One, I read that a man named Bill Simon, who had been Secretary of the Treasury under Gerald Ford, he went out, after Carter became president, Ford was no longer in office, Bill Simon went back to his native New Jersey, and he did something called a leveraged buyout. Now, I didn't know what a leveraged buyout was, but he put in $1 million of his own money, the newspaper article said, and 2.5 years later, he had $80 million. I said, that's better than practicing law. So I said, I got to find out what a leveraged buyout is, and that's what I'm going to do. So I said, I'm going to start the first leveraged buyout company in Washington. There aren't any leveraged buyout companies. Nobody knew what one was, and I didn't really have any finance experience, but I figured I could recruit some people. And then I read one other thing that changed my life. I read that an entrepreneur will start his or her first company between the ages of 28 and 37. And after the age of 37, your chance of starting a company goes down, not unlike a woman's chance of reproducing goes down after a certain age, or the chance of starting a company goes down after a certain age, and that age was 37. And I read that when I was 37. I said, uh-oh, I better start a company. So I recruited 3 people who actually had finance experience, and they knew something about finance. I didn't know anything about finance. I mumbled we had the money. We were going to start the first leveraged buyout company in Washington. They showed up. They said, okay, how much money do we have? I said, well, I didn't really mean to say we had the money. I said I was going to get the money. So I then spent about 6 months raising the first $5 million. That's all we could raise, for $5 million from 4 investors. Now we've built one of the largest private equity firms in the world. And what happened to me, though, was after I built this company with the help of my partners and many, many people, an article came out in Forbes about my net worth. And I had never calculated my net worth, but the article was saying I was very, very wealthy. And I realized then that I had lived 2/3 of my actuarial life, my expected actuarial life. I think I was 54, and I was probably lived 2/3 of it. And I realized that I had spent much of my life trying to make something of myself, build something from nothing, and ultimately I built a company that was successful, but I didn't really have any plans what to do with all this money. What should I do with it? Should I build a pyramid like the pharaohs did and just, say how great I was and have a pyramid? It would live for thousands of years afterwards, but it didn't seem like a good idea. I wasn't sure I could take the money in the afterlife and need it like the pharaohs did, so I wasn't sure I would really need the money. I could just give it to my executor to give away, but I wasn't sure I'd be in a place where I could see what he was doing with it. I could give it to my children and ruin them for the rest of their lives by giving them all this money. They might not have agreed with that point of view. Or I could give it away while I was alive and try to do something useful with it. And that's what I decided to do. And I'll talk a little bit about that in a moment. But I just wanted to say to everybody here that as you think about what you're going to do with your lives, try to think about doing something more than just the making of money and just doing something useful for society. And let me get into that a little bit more deeply. So this country that we are living in now, some of you may not be natives of this country, may move from this country, but this country is unique. Why is this country unique? Well, many different reasons. We have a constitution that was put together in a 4-month period of time by 55 white males who came to Philadelphia, and they put together a constitution that, while it has had about 27 amendments or so, really has stood the test of time and over some 240 years has become a role model as a way of a government to work while it has its problems, has been a really stable government and has been an incredible opportunity. Now, the Constitution had flaws, had a birth defect in terms of letting slavery exist, but on the whole, the Constitution has enabled this country to go from being a very, very modest set of 13 colonies to the most important and the best country in the world. So that's one of the things that we have in our country. Another thing that's unique about this country is that we've had a melting pot. This country has welcomed people traditionally from all over the world, and many people have brought different talents. My ancestors came from the Ukraine area. Your ancestors might have come from some other area of the world, but people from different parts of the world have built this country, and it's been an incredible opportunity for many people to really make something from nothing. And there's also been in this country a sense that you can rise from the bottom. Now, there is problem today for sure in income inequality and social mobility, and maybe it's getting to be worse than it was 10 years ago or 20 years ago. But there's no doubt that the American dream is one that I believed in. I believe that you could work up your way from nothing to something through a number of things I'll talk about in a moment. And all of you probably have bought into this idea too, that you can, in this country, make a difference. You aren't determined, your life outcome isn't determined by who you were born to, but what you do with your own merits. With some exceptions, obviously there's prejudice, there's some handicaps some people have, and setbacks, but no doubt you have a chance in this country to have an opportunity to rise up. And the fourth thing that makes this country somewhat unique, in my view, is that this country has valued business. Now, Calvin Coolidge, a president of the United States, once famously said, misquoted a bit, the business of the United States is business. Now, he didn't really mean to say that was the only thing in the country, but he meant to say that business is an important part of our country. And there's no doubt that over the last 240 years, the United States' ability to become the most important country in the world is due to the economic wealth that we've created in this country, created by entrepreneurs, businesses, a whole variety of different skills and talents that have come together to create the envy of the world in various parts of our country, Silicon Valley, or Wall Street, or Utah, other places where there are great entrepreneurs building great businesses. And this is one of the things that's made us so wealthy. And all of you who go to business school, who have been to business school, should think about this. If the business of the United States has been viewed by some as business, well, that's not really all the country's about, and many other things, why do you want to go to business school? What's the point of business school, and what will enable you to be successful in business? And I've tried to think about that. So if you go to business school, or you've graduated from business school, what is it that's going to make you successful? What is it that made my company successful? What is it that enabled me to come from very modest circumstances to where I am today? Well, these are the qualities. I won't say there's the only qualities, but these are the ones I think are the most important. Number one, perseverance. Perseverance. You have to persevere. People who build great companies are generally told at the beginning, your idea is terrible. Bill Gates was told his idea was terrible. Steve Jobs was told his idea was terrible. Jeff Bezos was told his idea was terrible. In fact, I told Jeff Bezos his idea was terrible. But when Jeff Bezos was starting his company, he didn't have anything at all. He had no money. We owned a company then called Baker & Taylor, the second largest book distributor in the United States. Started in 1839, had not made a profit since 1839. It was always break even. We had the biggest bibliography in print, books in print. Jeff Bezos was going to sell books over the internet. He came to our company, said he wanted to rent our bibliography. He didn't have any money. He would give us a third of the company that he was going to build in return for the bibliography. Our salesman said, no, we're too smart for that. We'll just take some cash. We don't really want a piece of a new company. So we took $100,000 a year for 5 years. After a while, I said, geez, maybe this company's going to get somewhere. Maybe we should get some of that third. I went out to see Jeff Bezos, and the company had very modest revenues. He was in a ramshackle office. I said, you know what? I don't think we need the $100,000 so much. Why don't you just give us the stock, the third that you promised before? He said, well, I don't need you so much anymore. You were helpful, but right now the company's 2 years old, and then I was brand new. But I'll give you some stock. I'll give you about 1% of the company, which we didn't think was going to go very far. So at the IPO, we sold it for $50 million. It's today worth about $5 billion. But anyway, Jeff Bezos did not think at the time his company would become what it became. But what he persevered. You have to persevere, and perseverance to me is the most important thing. Another quality I think is important is intelligence, but I don't think it's that important. Geniuses are wonderful people. They might contribute to society. Albert Einstein is wonderful, but I wouldn't hire Albert Einstein. Geniuses are very difficult to manage. And so I think intelligence is helpful, but being the smartest person in the room is not necessarily the most important thing to being successful in business. If you read about a lot of great business people, intelligence may not be their highest value. In some cases, they're very smart. Jeff Bezos, Bill Gates are very, very smart. But generally, you don't need super intelligence to build a business or be successful in business. Third is hard work. Nobody built a great business or got very far in business working 9 to 5, 5 days a week. Now, 9 to 5, 5 days a week, it's an okay life, but if you really want to achieve something in business or anything in life, you've got to work much longer hours. Another quality that I think is very important is focus. When you're building a company or you're working hard, you have to focus on what you're doing. You can't do 25 things at once. Maybe when you get older, you can do many different things, but focus, focus, focus. Another quality that I think is very important is the ability to share credit. Ronald Reagan famously said, there's no limit to what humans can achieve if they're willing to share the credit, and he's right. Many times I don't hire people if I notice when I'm interviewing them, they always talk about I did this, never we. I want people who, and I believe people succeed in business when they share the credit, they work as a team. Private equity is a team sport. There are no geniuses in private equity. It's a team sport. I also think that an important quality is the ability to communicate. Today, what is life all about but communicating, persuading other people to do what you want? That's what life is really all about. Think about it. Your partner, your spouse, your children, anybody, what you're trying to do is persuade them to do what you think is a good thing for them to do. Well, how do you do that? Well, you can do it by learning how to talk, oral communication. Perfecting that is very good. Learning how to write well, more than just Twitter tweets, and learning how to be a leader by example. So communicate to other people that you are somebody that they should follow because you write well, your written word can enable them to follow what you want and they follow you. There are obviously a lot of great leaders who have written very important things and people have followed what they've said or written. Oral communication, great speeches, learning how to talk to people, how to persuade people, and third, leading by example. When George Washington was at Valley Forge, he didn't have to be there with his troops in 1777. He could have stayed at a nice fancy hotel somewhere else, but he stayed with his troops and he led by example. And so I think business people who are going to do something have to lead by example. And so I think that all these are qualities that I think are very important. I think also remembering when you're building a business and you're in business, the most important thing is your customer. Customers have to come first. And the great business people like Jeff Bezos, Bill Gates, and others put customers first. They also have certain other qualities. While there's no doubt self-confidence is important. If you have no self-confidence, you're probably not going to do anything. Arrogance is really the opposite of self-confidence. I think humility is an important thing. Remembering that you are not doing this all by yourself. You're not the greatest person in the world. Having some humility and talking about what you've achieved with some humility, I think can be a great virtue and can help you get much further. The most successful business people I've met, Warren Buffett among others, have great humility, and I think that's a great virtue. So you take these qualities and you say, you take a look at some of the great business people, they've had a lot of these qualities, and any of you who want to build a business, I think these are the things that you really should want to focus on, have these kind of qualities, perfect them, try to make sure that you are doing these kind of things, and over and over again say, how can I improve my skills in these areas? But let's suppose you have these skills, either your God-given skills are good or you practice, and you have all the skills that I've just said, and you'll be successful in business, and you rise up, and you get lucky like I did. You get lucky. All right, so you have a lot of money. What are you going to do with that money? The purpose of business is not to accumulate money. It's just not. The purpose of business, really, and the purpose of life is to help other people. Now, none of us really know for certain why we're on the face of the earth. Nobody really knows. You can have religious beliefs about why you're here, but there's no definite proof about why we're here and what our purpose is. But at some point, all of you should come to, as I have, a sense that there is some reason why you're on the face of the earth, and presumably it's to make the earth a better place than you found it when you were born here. So how do you do that? Well, is it by making billions of dollars? Well, it can be if you make billions of dollars and you do something useful with it. If your purpose in life is just to say, I'm richer than somebody else, I have a bigger home, I have a bigger plane, I have a bigger art collection, I have more homes than anybody else, you're going to lead a very shallow life. Most of the very wealthy people I know who do nothing but accumulate wealth are relatively unhappy. The most elusive thing in life is personal happiness. The happiest people I know are either people who are not very wealthy or people that have figured out what to do with their wealth and are doing something useful with it. And by that I mean giving it away in productive ways. Now, the Eccles family is a great example out in this part of the world and the whole country about giving away money in useful ways. Now, it's not that easy to do. Now, you all will laugh when I say, well, it's easy to make the money, it's hard to give it away. Of course, you can give away the money in 5 seconds if you want, but giving it away intelligently is something I think is both a pleasure and an important skill. And I think in my own case, I came to this relatively late in life. I didn't really have any money, but I could have done other things as a younger man. I like to remind people that philanthropy is an ancient Greek word that means loving humanity. It doesn't mean rich people writing checks. So you can love humanity by giving your time, your energy, your ideas. If you have money, you can give that too. I should have done much more earlier in my life to help other people, but I was so career focused, I didn't really do as much. Now I'm trying to make up for it. I was one of the 40 original people that signed the Giving Pledge with Bill Gates and Warren Buffett, and that says you're going to give away half your money upon your lifetime or upon your death. Now, of course, there's a flaw in that, because if you say I'm going to give away half my money upon my death, and then you die and you don't give away the money, we can't disinter you and say, you're no longer in the giving pledge. But I actually decided to give away all my money, and I'm in the process of doing so. If I live a normal actuarial life expectancy, I will give away all my money, and my children are quite fine with that, because they realize that I've given them the things that you can give children that are the most valuable: unconditional love by your parents, a good education, secure upbringing, and I think that's more valuable than giving them tons of money. So I'm in the process of trying to give away my money, and there are many ways to do it, and there's an infinite number of good ways to do it. And I tell people, if you make a lot of money, figure out what you want to do with it to help other people in society, and pick something you're passionate about. In my own case, I have given back to the universities I've been involved with and helped my family and myself, or medical institutions that I think are doing great work. I found one little narrow niche that I have pursued that was mentioned earlier, and it's something I call patriotic philanthropy. And by that I mean trying to remind people of the wonderful and the bad of our country's history, making certain that people know more about our history and our heritage, so that if they know more about our history and heritage, maybe we can avoid mistakes that we've made in the past. And it turns out that this is a need that I think exists because, one, we don't teach civics courses anymore in the United States. You can graduate from almost any college as a history major and not have to take an American history course. And in very few courses, in very few places where you get a PhD in history, do you have to take even an American history course. Today, people know so little about our country's history. So, for example, as I was saying earlier, in remarks earlier today at a breakfast, this is hard to believe, but 10% of Americans, when asked, think that Judge Judy is on the United States Supreme Court, which is not the case. In another survey, it turned out that 35% of Americans, when asked what river did George Washington cross during the Revolutionary War, said the Rhine River, which happens not to be in our country. This was even harder to believe. A majority of Americans cannot, when asked, name the 3 branches of government. Hard to believe that. A high school survey of sophomores not long ago showed that more high school sophomores can name the first 3 names of the 3 Stooges than the first 3 names of any founding fathers. So my theory has been, if we can teach people more about American history and we can get them interested in learning more, maybe we'll learn how to avoid some of the mistakes we've made, and ultimately to make a better society for ourselves. So I got into this by happenstance. I didn't call McKinsey up and say, what can I do to make the world a better place? What can I do to educate people more about American history? I said, nothing like that. It was by happenstance. And many of the things in life that happen to you and happen to me and others that are good are by happenstance, serendipity. So for example, I was invited by, of all things, an investment banker to go to view a copy of the Magna Carta. Now, I didn't really understand this. This was in New York. I said, well, Magna Carta must be in London. I just had flown in from London. I thought it was there. It turns out when I went there that there are 17 extant copies of the Magna Carta, maybe the most famous document in Western civilization. 15 are in British institutions, one's in the Australian Parliament. But one was bought by Ross Perot in the early 1980s from a British family that had it in its possession for some 500 years. The family was land poor. They decided to sell it. Ross Perot heard about it. He sent his lawyer over, negotiated a deal to buy the Magna Carta. He bought it for about $1 million, rolled it up in a tube, went through British customs. The customs agent said, what's in that tube? He said, oh, the Magna Carta. Oh, sure, Frank, go ahead. And but he didn't get an export license. He brought it back. He put it on display at the National Archives. Ross Perot, for whatever reason, decided to put it up for sale. I think he wanted to use the proceeds for medical compensation, other related things for people who have been injured in Iraq, a very good cause. So he put it up for sale. The curator at the Sotheby's told me that it's going to be going to somebody from outside the United States, most likely. She knew who the bidders were. And I just decided right then that it wasn't drafted in this country, but it was the inspiration for our founding fathers. The Magna Carta was a document that many people thought in this country in those days was something that was part of our country, because when our country was set up, the original charters said that you have the rights of all Englishmen in these charters, and those rights of Englishmen were the rights of the Magna Carta. So many of the founding fathers in their documents and their writings said, we have the rights of the Magna Carta, they're being violated. So I thought it was important to have one copy stay here. So I went back the next night when the auction occurred, and I went to buy it. I didn't want to tell my family, it sounds presumptuous, I'm going to say, I'm going to go buy the Magna Carta. So I kind of went back, went up to New York. I started bidding. I'm not a famous art collector, so I didn't really know much about it. And then ultimately, I couldn't hear what they were saying. I was in a little room, they put me in, and then ultimately the head of Sotheby's came in and said, "You just bought the Magna Carta. Who are you? We never saw you before. And by the way, do you have the money for this?" I said, "Yes." So he said, "You can slip out the side door and nobody will know who you are, or you can tell these 100 reporters who know who bought the Magna Carta." I said, "No, I'm going to tell them." I went out and said, "Look, I came from very modest circumstances. I'm going to make this as a down payment on my obligation to give back to this country. So I'm going to make it on a permanent loan to the National Archives, and when I die, it'll stay there forever." And so that's what it is, and now if you go to the National Archives, you'll see it. And then I got in the habit of buying other historic documents, because my theory was if people can see these historic documents, there might be incentive to learn more about the history. So I would start to buy the copy of the Emancipation Proclamation, the Declaration of Independence, Bill of Rights, Constitution, things like that, and then put them on display at the Smithsonian, the National Archives, the Mount Vernon, Montpelier, Monticello, other places around the country where people might go and be inspired to learn more. And then what happened was another thing happened by serendipity. I'm the chairman of the Kennedy Center in Washington, the Performing Arts Center named after John Kennedy. When I was there one time in a board meeting, one of our members of our board was an ex officio, was the head of the Park Service. He had told me when I was out of town that there had been an earthquake, the Washington Monument had been damaged. He said, "I have to go figure out how to get money to fix this. Congress moves slowly." I said, "I'll tell you what, I'll put up the money." He said, "Well, I don't know what it costs." I said, "Whatever it costs, I'll put up the money, fix the Washington Monument, forget Congress." Congress later turned around and said, "Wait a second, we don't get credit for doing anything good. Can we put up half the money?" So they did. Okay. They did. And so we've done that. It's now they have some other problems I'm in the process of fixing. But I then said, what I want to do is remind people of our history. So I'm going to try to fix things like the Monticello, which is Thomas Jefferson's home, Montpelier, James Madison's home, the Iwo Jima Memorial, the Arlington House at the top of Arlington Cemetery, and other places like that where people can go and observe these things. And so I've begun the process of doing that. And I call all this patriotic philanthropy as a way of trying to remind people of our country's history. When the Lincoln Memorial was kind of in disrepair, I said, "I'll put up the money to fix it, provided we put an underground education center there so people can learn more about Lincoln." And that's what I'm trying to do with one part of my philanthropy. And I don't know whether I'm making a difference or not, but I feel that it's important to try to give back to society. So for all of you who are students, and all of you who are not students now, I ask you to think about this. What are you doing with your life that justifies your existence on the face of the earth? If you've made a lot of money, congratulations, but the money is only useful if you're doing something to help other people. That's what life is all about. What humanity is different than the animal kingdom is that we try to help people who are not just related to us, but help all of society. And so I think all of you should think about what you can do with your time, your energy, your ideas to make society better. And the purpose of business school is not to make you extremely wealthy so you can die the richest person in the cemetery. It's to enable you to have the skills which will enable you to create something valuable. And then when you create something valuable, take the fruits of that and do something useful with it. Give it to other people in some intelligent, informed way that can make a difference so that you can feel when you get to my age, yes, you've justified your existence on the face of the earth. You've done something useful. And you can be certain that God will say, yes, you deserve to go to heaven because you have really done something useful. And I have a theory, and I'm not an expert in this, but I have a theory that those people who do philanthropic things and help other people live a long life, and when their time does come, there's a special place in heaven reserved for them. Now, I can't prove this, but why would you take a chance that I'm wrong? So all of you, if you think about anything I've said today, it should be that I was very lucky in my life, but you can make your luck, and all of you can make some luck by following the kind of principles I set out before: hard work, focus, taking something and making something from nothing, being creative, sharing credit, and also having some humility. And if you're fortunate in your business career to be able to make a fair amount of money, do something useful with it. Do something that gives back to society. Give something that all of you will be proud of, and that you too can say to your mother, yes, I did something useful, and your mother can say to you, thank you for doing something useful for society. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. much.
We've got microphones, one right here. Microphone coming from your right.
Yes. Okay. I thank you for that question. I should have mentioned that. It was one of the things I would have mentioned. The question is, I'm a voracious reader, and why do I care about it? I am the chairman of the Madison Council of the Library of Congress. I am the chair of the National Book Festival. We just had it this past weekend. And I attribute to this. My parents couldn't afford to buy books for me. So all I could do in Baltimore was go to a library. There was a public library about 2 miles away. We didn't have a car. And so I would walk 2 miles every Saturday to take out books. You were allowed to take out, when you're 6 years old, 12 books a week. And I read them one day, and I had to wait another week before I could take out 12 more books. But I love reading, and I just think that the brain is a muscle, and you have to exercise it. Amazingly, in this country, this is hard to believe, 45 million Americans are functionally illiterate. They can't read beyond a 5th grade level, amazingly. But more amazingly than that is that there is another problem, not just illiteracy. And illiteracy is a problem because 85% of juvenile delinquents are illiterate. 2/3 of our prison population are illiterate. But there's another problem called illiteracy. People can read, but they don't do so. Right now, 40% of all high school graduates have not read a book in the last year. People don't choose to read a book. They don't read very much. I try to read 2 books a week. It sounds like a lot, but I'm not reading physics textbooks. I'm reading history and biography and business, things I know something about. I can get through them pretty quickly. But I try to read because I'm exercising my brain. And I think if this muscle isn't used by reading, and reading books is much better than reading anything else, your brain can atrophy. And I don't want to be one of these people who doesn't use my brain. So it's very important to me. The National Book Festival is an incredible thing. I hope some of you get to come to it. You have book festivals out here. We get 200,000 people coming to Washington for free to hear from the best authors in the country. And a lot of it was on C-SPAN. I interviewed a lot of the authors over the weekend, David McCullough and Condi Rice and so forth. So reading is extremely important to me. I am obsessed with reading newspapers. I read about 4 or 5 or 6 a day and try to read 2 books a week, lots of magazines. That's just one of my obsessions in life, and I haven't succeeded in getting my children to be as obsessed with as I am, but they're still pretty good at reading. But reading is everything to me. And I think if you're going to be a successful business person, you have to keep your brain exercise. You have to keep reading and reading and reading because you never know what you'll learn that might help in your business career or your philanthropic career. Other questions? Yes?
I've watched you interview many of our nation's successful business and political leaders. Is there one interview that you particularly enjoyed,
Yeah.
or one person that's
Okay.
stuck with you?
What you're referring to is this. I became the president of the Economic Club of Washington about 9 years ago. And my job was to get a business person every quarter to come up and speak, and then I would get questions from the audience, and the cards, and I would read the questions to the person. Turns out most business people are boring speakers. They read a speech that somebody wrote for them. They didn't really know what they were talking about. At least they hadn't written it. And the questions from the audience were even worse. So I would get the questions, and I would pretend I was reading from the audience, and I would make up something that was somewhat humorous to keep people live in. People laughed, as you are. So I decided I'm junked the format. I went to an interview format. So I just now interview people, and we've done about 100 of them since I've been president. And then Bloomberg saw it, and Bloomberg gave me a TV show. It's Bloomberg, and now it's going to be on PBS, where I interview people. So I started with Bill Gates and Warren Buffett and so forth. One that appeared 2 weeks ago or so was one with George W. Bush and Bill Clinton together. And that was pretty interesting. They were very insightful about what it was like to be a former president. I did Oprah Winfrey. She was quite something. I think this week, Francis Collins is going to go on. He's the head of the NIH, an incredible scientist. So I do that. And what I try to do is my technique is to kind of learn as much as possible and have a conversation with people. Don't use any notes, and just kind of have a dialogue, and then get people to talk about what made them tick, what made them grow up, how they become what they became, and try to make it like a informal, personal conversation about what their life is about, not about what their achievements might be. And I enjoy doing it, but I enjoy all the ones I do. Oprah probably got the most attention, and maybe the Bush and Clinton got the most, but they're all, I think, interesting, so I hope you'll watch it. Time for more questions in the back?
So I think your patriotic philanthropy is just amazing. But I do have a question, and I'm not trying to be controversial. I'm trying to figure it out because a lot of what I've learned from history has been visiting some of the sites that have been atrocious in history. Especially over in Europe, like concentration camps and
Yes.
World War II sites. So in the U.S. now, there's the controversy of in the South of
Yes.
sites being taken down. What's your take on that?
Well, when I have done things like help rebuild Monticello or Montpelier or Arlington House, I've insisted that the slave quarters be built out because I want people to make sure that we recognize that these great leaders had flaws. They were slave owners, and I don't think you can completely rewrite history and say that they were not slave owners or that they didn't do some very good things. The fight that's now going on, to some extent, is not about, in my view, honoring Robert E. Lee for his courage in fighting for his state of Virginia. He was not particularly interested in slavery. That was not one of his big things. But I think it's now become a thing that gets to deal with other issues relating other than history. People are personifying Robert E. Lee as a slave owner and as a person who didn't like African Americans, and as a result, some people are personifying him as a good thing because of that, and I think that's distorted the whole thing about the monuments and so forth. The monuments will be an issue, will be with us for a long time. I don't think there's a perfect answer to it. The Arlington House, for example, is the official government monument to Robert E. Lee. I agreed to fund it because I thought at the top of the most sacred land in our country, the Arlington Cemetery, there should be something that people can go and see more about our history. It was actually built as a monument originally to George Washington, but I didn't fund it because I really am interested in Robert E. Lee. But there's no doubt in this environment, you can get criticized for lots of different things. I do think that we should learn more about the bad and the good of our history, because if we don't learn about the bad, we'll never be able to correct that in the future. So one more, yes?
I'd actually love to get your take on the current political environment.
What's the next question? Look,
And the direction that you
okay.
we can
The country's government is sort of dysfunctional. It started, I would say, maybe around the time that George Bush was elected, in part because of the way he was elected, the Supreme Court having to resolve it. I think from that time on, Democrats and Republicans have just basically not socialized with each other. They don't really talk to each other very much. And the result is that it's hard to get anything done in a bipartisan way. I worked briefly on Capitol Hill. In those days, the legislators were people that get things done by talking to people in the opposite party. That doesn't exist anymore. And so the government is more or less dysfunctional. When you have to worry about whether you keep the government's debt credit rating alive or you can keep the government open, that's not a good thing. So I think it's going to go on for a while until we have some crisis that forces us to change. And I thought 9/11 might have done that, but people after a while forgot about that. So we've gone back to our old ways. I think it's not very good. I think under President Trump, it's still a big challenge, and I don't think you're going to get any Democratic votes for anything President Trump more or less wants. And I think it's not a good thing for our country. And although I still think it's the greatest country on the face of the earth, we have a wonderful government generally. Right now, it's in a period of dysfunction, and anybody that thinks it's functioning well is just not really being honest, in my view. I don't know how to change it, but it's not working well. Okay, so I want to thank you all very much. Thank you. Thank you.
David, that was supremely insightful. Thank you for all of your words of wisdom. I hope many of the students can take some of those back with you and apply them a bit in your future plans. It is our tradition to name a scholarship after our Convocation speaker, and so this year we will be awarding the David Rubenstein Scholarship. Thank you very much for coming.
Thank you.
And thank you all for coming very much. We'll see you next year.
Thank you.